The second time Celeste Arden hugged me after stealing the election, I hugged her back. That was how I knew I had truly become dangerous. In my first life, the moment the results were announced and Celeste's name rang through the assembly hall, I froze so hard my hands went numb around the edge of my blazer. Everyone clapped. Someone screamed. Celeste turned to me with tears glittering under her lashes, the kind of tears girls like her produced on command whenever victory needed softness, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Liana. You would have been amazing too." Then she wrapped her arms around me in front of 400 students, 3 teachers, and 2 visiting parents from the school board. I stood there like a corpse being posed for a photograph. In that first life, I pushed her away. Not violently, not enough to hurt her, but enough that the whole front row saw it. The applause thinned. Celeste stumbled back, one hand to her chest, eyes wide with wounded shock. By lunch, everyone said I had snapped because I lost. By Monday, they said I had been planning to challenge the count because I was arrogant. By the end of the month, Celeste was class president, then student council chair, then the face of Westbridge Academy's leadership program, while I became the bitter girl who could not accept democracy unless it crowned her. The worst part was that the election really had been stolen. Celeste's campaign team had forged absentee ballots, pressured younger students into giving up their voting slips, and used dead club memberships to submit votes from students who were homesick. I found proof too late, after the ballots were disposed of according to policy, and after my complaints sounded like jealousy wrapped in paperwork. So when I woke up reborn on election morning with rain tapping the dormer window and my campaign speech still folded on my desk, I did not plan to stop Celeste from winning. I planned to let her win loudly enough that the second count could hear her. Our school took class elections far too seriously, which is exactly why they were so easy to corrupt. Westbridge Academy called itself a civic leadership environment, a phrase printed on banners, brochures, assembly slides, and the reusable water bottles they gave to scholarship students during orientation as if hydration were mentorship. Every year, the Year 11 class president received a seat on student council, access to leadership workshops, a recommendation letter from the principal, and first consideration for the senior ambassador program. The position did not control armies, but in a school obsessed with future resumes, it may as well have. In my first life, I ran because I cared about boring things: tutoring rosters, exam stress policies, lunch space access, and the fact that the scholarship students kept getting asked to speak at donor events but never got asked what support they needed afterward. Celeste ran because she understood that presidency was a staircase. She was already beautiful in the way schools reward: glossy hair, clean grades, old family money, a laugh that sounded inclusive until you realized she always chose who stood close enough to hear it. Her posters said listening, service, belonging. She had never once listened without calculating how the answer might be useful later. I knew that now. I knew her campaign manager, Poppy, had access to the ballot storage cupboard because her mother volunteered in the office. I knew Celeste's boyfriend, Adrian, had convinced the Year 10 tech helpers to test the digital voting tablets with practice logins. I knew the paper ballot audit had been introduced secretly after a complaint from another grade, and I knew something Celeste never learned in the first life until it was too late for me to benefit. This year, because the school's civic leadership program was being reviewed by an external education assessor, the vote count would be audited twice. First by the election committee immediately after assembly. Then again by the assessor using ballot IDs, digital login logs, and sealed absentee envelopes. Celeste thought she could steal a crown from a cardboard box. She did not know the box had a shadow. At 6:10 a.m., I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor and opened the envelope where I kept my campaign materials. The speech was still there, written in my own careful handwriting, 3 pages long, too honest for a popularity contest, and too practical for a girl trying to win hearts with slogans. I remember delivering it in my first life with my voice shaking only once. I remembered the applause afterward, not wild like Celeste's, but steady, thoughtful, real. I remembered thinking maybe that would be enough. It had not been, because elections do not reward being enough when the numbers are being rewritten behind the curtain. This time, I left the speech mostly unchanged. I added one sentence near the end. Leadership is not proven by the number beside your name. It is proven by what you are willing to let be checked. It was not a threat. It was a seed. Then I opened my laptop and wrote a second document titled, Election Integrity Concerns, submitted before results. I did not accuse Celeste directly. Accusations without proof give liars a mirror to rehearse in. I listed observations. Poppy entering the office storage hallway twice after campaign curfew. Adrian asking year 10 helpers whether test logins created real vote records. Celeste supporters distributing sample ballots near the library. 3 boarders telling me they had been asked if they were really going to waste their vote. 2 absent students appearing active in the campaign group chat despite being off campus. My own campaign poster torn down only where cameras did not reach. I attached screenshots, times, and names. At 7:02, before breakfast, I sent it to Ms. Varga, the civics teacher overseeing the election, and copied the external assessor's public school email from the review notice. My finger hovered over send for 3 seconds. In my first life, I had waited until after the loss because I did not want to sound paranoid. Paranoia after harm is called evidence too late. I clicked send. Ms. Varga replied 12 minutes later. Received. Do not confront any student. Continue as normal. All ballots are subject to standard verification. Standard verification. A cold phrase, but useful. Beneath it, a second reply arrived from the external assessor, Dr. Nadir. Thank you for submitting concerns prior to results. Please preserve all screenshots. I will review vote process materials after initial count. Prior to results. That phrase was the difference between bitterness and credibility. I printed both emails and slid them into my blazer pocket, not because I planned to wave them around, but because paper has a weight that steadies the hand. At breakfast, Celeste floated between tables wearing a white ribbon in her hair, smiling like she was already accepting congratulations. She hugged nervous girls, high-fived boys who had never attended a council meeting in their lives, and told boarders she hoped today feels fair and positive for everyone. Poppy trailed behind with a clipboard she did not need, checking names with a tiny silver pen. When they reached my table, the entire room seemed to inhale. My friend Sarah, who had spent 2 weeks designing my posters and 3 years disliking Celeste with academic discipline, went very still beside me. Celeste leaned down, her perfume soft and expensive. Big day, Liana, she said. Whatever happens, I hope we stay graceful. In my first life, I answered, of course, and meant it. This time, I looked at her clipboard. Grace is easier when nobody has to check the math. Poppy's pen stopped. Celeste's smile widened by half a degree. Still doing numbers before coffee? Always. Sarah coughed into her juice. Celeste touched my shoulder lightly, a public blessing disguised as ownership, then moved on. I let her. Cameras near the dining hall caught everything. The voting period ran from 8 to 10:30, and the school had designed it to look transparent while accidentally creating 6 ways to cheat. Students received paper ballots in homeroom, marked first preference and second preference, then dropped them into sealed boxes outside the library. Absentee students could submit sealed envelopes through the office. Boarders on excursions were supposed to vote digitally through supervised tablets using single-use login codes. In theory, every vote had a matching student ID ticked off once. In practice, the first life taught me that in theory is where corruption goes to buy nice shoes. I watched without interfering. Poppy hovered near the library line, saying things like, make sure you fill both preferences or your ballot might not count, which was false but sounded official. Adrian stood near the tablets, laughing with year 10 helpers, offering to fix glitches. Celeste campaigned exactly 1 meter beyond the no campaigning line, hands clasped, saying, vote with your conscience, whenever a teacher looked over, and remember who can actually get things done, when they did not. Sarah kept muttering, I want to bite them, which did not help but did comfort me. At 8:47, a year 11 named Mira approached me with her ballot folded in half. She was a quiet boarder, new that year, always worried about breaking rules. Celeste's group said I have to show them mine before I put it in, because they're checking invalid ballots, she whispered. My anger rose so fast I tasted metal. In the first life, I had stormed over to Poppy and accused her publicly. She denied it, Mira panicked, and I looked aggressive. This time, I asked, who said it? Poppy. Did anyone else hear? Renee. Do you want help reporting it? Mira hesitated. Will they know? Not from me. She nodded. I walked her to Ms. Varga and said only, Mira has a voting process concern. Then I stepped back and let the adult collect the evidence while it was still warm. By 10:12, Celeste's confidence had become almost too bright to look at directly. That was how I knew her team thought the manipulation had worked. She crossed the courtyard with Adrian at her side, laughing at something he said, and for a second I saw her not as a villain but as a girl so committed to becoming inevitable that she had forgotten other people existed outside her storyline. That did not soften me. It clarified the danger. People who believe they are destined for leadership often treat rules as obstacles placed by less visionary minds. At 10:20, 5 minutes before the boxes closed, Poppy disappeared toward the office hallway. Sarah's elbow slammed into my ribs. There. I saw it. Poppy's silver hair clip, the campaign clipboard tucked under her arm, the half-run of someone pretending not to hurry. In the first life, I followed and got caught outside the admin door by a receptionist who asked why I was wandering during voting time. That created a convenient, suspicious movement, note later. This time, I stayed where the courtyard camera could see me and texted Ms. Varga. Poppy entered office hallway 10:20 with clipboard. I am staying in courtyard. The reply came quickly. Received. 30 seconds later, Dr. Nadir walked out of the staff room and headed toward the office hallway. He was tall, bearded, and carried a tablet like a shield. Poppy emerged 2 minutes after, face smooth but eyes too alert. She saw me in the courtyard and frowned, annoyed that I had not followed the bait. I lifted my water bottle in a tiny toast. She looked away. The speeches happened after recess in the auditorium. The room was packed with Year 11 students, teachers along the aisles, and the junior leadership elective watching from the balcony because Westbridge believed democracy improved when younger students saw older students lie elegantly. Celeste spoke first. She owned the stage as if she had rented it with family money. Her speech was gorgeous in the way frosted cakes are gorgeous before anyone checks whether there is anything inside. She talked about unity, voice, compassion, and making sure every student felt seen. She mentioned tutoring equity because my campaign had forced the issue into the air, and she did it with a sorrowful glance toward the scholarship row, as if she had personally discovered inequality between hair appointments. The audience loved her. Of course they did. Celeste gave people a version of politics where voting for her meant they were kind without needing to change anything. Then it was my turn. In my first life, I tried to out-sincerity her. I talked about policies, practical changes, student reporting, accessible leadership minutes, and mental health support during exams. It was good. Too good for a room already sugar-drunk. This time, I still talked policy, but I changed my shape. I opened with the truth as a hook. I don't think a school election should feel like a popularity contest wearing a blazer. The room laughed, startled. Celeste did not. I continued. If I become president, you will not see my face on every poster promising to listen. You will see meeting notes. You will see budgets. You will see anonymous issue forms and follow-up dates. You will see who voted for what in council. Because if leadership cannot survive being checked, it is not leadership. It is performance. I paused. Some students clapped before I finished, then stopped awkwardly. Good. Awkward meant awake. At the end, I added the sentence from my revised speech. Leadership is not proven by the number beside your name. It is proven by what you are willing to let be checked. From the front row, Ms. Varga looked down at her papers. Dr. Nadir wrote something. Celeste smiled like she was listening to a child describe gravity. The count took 40 minutes. In that time, the auditorium dissolved into noise. Students predicted margins, traded rumors, checked phones, and pretended not to care. Sarah sat beside me, vibrating with fury. I know they did something, she whispered. You know they did something. Everyone with a brain stem knows. Let them count. What if the count is fake? Then let them audit. She looked at me sharply. You said that weirdly. I'm having a weird day. That was true. Rebirth makes every familiar second feel like stepping on glass you know is there, but cannot avoid. Across the aisle, Celeste held court. Poppy leaned close to her, murmuring updates, while Adrian sat with his arm along the back of the seat, king of nothing, smiling at people who looked likely to congratulate them. I watched Celeste's face as Poppy whispered one last thing. Relief flashed there. Not hope. Relief. She knew. At 12:06, Principal Rose stepped onto the stage with an envelope. Ms. Vargas stood beside him. Dr. Nadir stayed seated near the front, tablet on his knee. Thank you to all candidates, Principal Rowe began, which is how adults warn you someone is about to lose politely. My pulse slowed. In my first life, the next 10 seconds had felt like being pushed off a roof. This time, I looked at Celeste. She arranged surprise before the name was spoken. With 247 verified votes, our Year 11 class president is Celeste Arden. The auditorium erupted. Celeste covered her mouth, eyes bright, pretending the number was news. Sarah whispered a word that would have earned attention if any teacher had heard. I stood and clapped. It was the hardest acting I had ever done. Harder than any school play, any scholarship interview, any polite conversation with donors who called us inspiring. I clapped while Celeste walked to the stage. I clapped while she hugged Principal Rowe. I clapped while she gave a spontaneous thank you speech that was clearly memorized. I clapped while she said, "Liana made this race stronger, and I hope she'll work beside me," as if she had not spent 2 weeks arranging my loss like furniture. Then she came down the steps and hugged me. That was the moment from my first life, the hinge, the bait. Her arms around me, perfume at my throat, cameras nearby, the whole room watching to see whether I could lose prettily. I hugged her back. Gently. Publicly. I even said, "Congratulations." Her body stiffened for half a second. She had expected resistance. Without it, her victory had nowhere to convert into my disgrace. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, too softly for anyone else, I guess the count was clear. I smiled against her shoulder. The first one. She pulled back. Her face remained radiant, but her eyes changed. A tiny question appeared there. Before she could ask it, Principal Rowe returned to the microphone. "Students, please remain seated. As part of this year's Civic Leadership Review, all election results will undergo routine verification before final certification this afternoon." The applause died in pieces. Celeste's hand was still on my arm when she heard it. I felt her fingers loosen. The first audit began immediately, and the school tried to make it look boring. Boring is a useful disguise for danger. Students returned to class while the election committee, Ms. Varga, Dr. Nadir, 2 office staff, and 1 Year 12 observer took the ballot boxes to the conference room. The result was provisional, a word that began spreading through corridors like a small, sharp animal. Celeste's supporters insisted provisional meant nothing. "All elections get certified," Poppy said near the lockers, voice bright enough to crack. "It's just admin." Adrian laughed loudly and told people I was probably praying for a recount. In the first life, I would have denied that, argued, maybe shown my anger. This time, I took out my phone and texted Sarah, "Do not respond to anything. Save anything weird." She replied with 11 skull emojis. I went to maths. I solved quadratic inequalities while the presidency sat somewhere in a locked room being counted again. That was almost funny. At 1:18, during silent work, my phone buzzed with an email from Ms. Varga. "Please attend conference room B at 1:45. Bring any preserved screenshots or notes. You are not in trouble. You are not in trouble." I read it 3 times. In my first life, office emails never clarified that until after they had already made me feel accused. At 1:45, I entered conference room B and found not a tribunal, but a table covered in envelopes, ballot stacks, printed login reports, and the quiet intensity of adults discovering something ugly in a place decorated with student artwork. Ms. Varga gestured for me to sit. Dr. Nadir sat opposite with a spreadsheet open. Principal Rowe stood near the window, arms folded, face grave. "Liana," Ms. Varga said, "your pre-result email raised concerns that are relevant to discrepancies found in the first audit." My heart kicked. Even when you know the trap is closing on someone else, the sound of metal still frightens you. What discrepancies? I asked. Dr. Nadir turned the laptop slightly. The announced count gave Celeste 247 votes, you 221, and the remaining candidates 39 combined. The first audit has invalidated 28 votes from Celeste's total due to duplicate student IDs, mismatched absentee envelopes, and digital logins generated from test accounts. That changes the count significantly. I looked at the table. 28. In my first life, I had suspected maybe 10, maybe 15. 28 was not desperation. It was architecture. Ms. Varga continued. That alone would trigger a certification hold. However, your submitted concerns also align with irregularities around Poppy Arden's access to the office hallway and Adrian Bell's involvement with tablet testing. Poppy Arden? I repeated. Celeste's cousin, Ms. Varga said. Of course. Poppy had always used her mother's office access, but her surname being Arden meant family loyalty had been hiding in plain sight. Dr. Nadir asked me to walk through every screenshot. I did. Times, names, messages, Myra's complaint, Poppy near the hallway, Adrian near tablets, the no campaigning line, the sample ballots. I spoke slowly.
No adjectives.
No, she always. No, everyone knows. Just what I had seen before the result existed. Principal Rowe looked older with every sentence. When I finished, he said, "Why did you not request a pause before the announcement?" The question could have sounded accusatory. It sounded tired. I answered honestly. Because if I stopped it before the count, she could say I was afraid to lose. If the count ran and the audit found the problem, the numbers would speak before I had to. No one responded for a moment. Then Dr. Nadir said, almost to himself, a painful but accurate understanding of institutional credibility. The second audit happened at 2:30, and this time Celeste was present. So were Poppy, Adrian, their parents, me, Sarah as my chosen support person, Ms. Varga, Principal Rowe, Dr. Nadir, and 2 members of the school board's governance subcommittee, which was a fancy way of saying adults had realized the scandal was no longer containable in a classroom. The conference room felt too bright. Every chair scrape sounded like accusation. Celeste sat across from me wearing the same white ribbon, but now it looked less like innocence and more like evidence of costume. Her mother, Mrs. Arden, placed a hand over hers and smiled at the room with bored dinner polish. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding caused by overenthusiastic students, she said before anyone had formally begun. Poppy stared at the ballot stacks. Adrian bounced one knee under the table until his father touched his shoulder. Dr. Nadir did not waste time. This second audit will review the ballot chain, voter ID tick-off, absentee envelopes, and digital access logs. The provisional announcement is not certified. No student has been formally appointed. Celeste's mouth tightened on not certified. In her first life, she wore the title before anyone questioned the stitching. This time, the title had been placed on the table like an object under inspection. Dr. Nadir began with paper ballots. 7 ballots marked for Celeste used student IDs already recorded as voting in person for another candidate or not voting at all. Poppy whispered, "That could be clerical." Dr. Nadir looked at her. "All 7 are in the same handwriting." Silence. He slid copies across the table. Mrs. Arden inhaled. I did not look at Celeste. I watched her hands. They were perfectly still. That frightened me more than shaking would have. Next came the absentee envelopes. 9 absentee ballots were submitted from students listed as off-campus. 4 of those students have since confirmed by email that they did not submit a ballot. 2 were absent due to illness and did not access school email. 3 envelopes have mismatched signature records. Principal Rowe's jaw tightened. Ms. Varga looked physically pained. Celeste finally spoke. I didn't handle absentee ballots. Her voice was soft, controlled, hurt. I don't know why this is being connected to me personally. It was a clever sentence. She did not deny benefit. She denied handling.
Poppy straightened.
I collected envelopes from students who gave them to me. I thought I was helping. Dr. Nadir clicked to the next screen. Office corridor footage shows you entering the storage hallway at 10:20 with a clipboard. You were not authorized to access ballot materials. Poppy's cheeks flushed. I was looking for my mother. Your mother was not on site today. A small silence opened. Poppy looked at Celeste. Celeste did not look back. There it was, the first sacrifice. Powerful girls build loyalty out of warmth, but when the room changes, they often discover loyalty expects shelter in return. Celeste offered none. Adrian attempted a laugh. This is getting dramatic. Dr. Nadir turned to him. We can move to digital logs. His laugh died. 14 digital votes were recorded through test access codes generated during tablet setup. 12 selected Celeste as first preference. 2 were incomplete. The test codes were generated from a helper account used at 8:36 from tablet station 3. Adrian's father said, many students were near those tablets. Dr. Nadir nodded.
Yes.
The tablet camera shows Adrian Bell at Station 3 at 8:36, unsupervised, after asking the Year 10 helper to get more styluses. Sarah made a tiny sound beside me, something between a cough and a prayer. Celeste's mask finally cracked, but not in panic. In anger, she turned to Adrian, eyes blazing. You said the test votes wouldn't count. The room froze. The sentence hung there, clean and impossible to perfume. Adrian's face emptied. Poppy whispered, Celeste. Mrs. Arden's hand tightened over her daughter's too late. Celeste realized what she had said exactly 1 second after everyone else. She tried to recover. I mean, he told me there were test votes. I didn't know anything improper happened. Dr. Nadir typed something slowly. Ms. Varga closed her eyes for half a second. Principal Rose said, Celeste, did you know test votes were being generated? No. You just said Adrian told you they would not count. I meant hypothetically. Sarah muttered, that's not what hypothetical means, and I stepped on her foot under the table. Mrs. Arden leaned forward. My daughter is distressed. She misspoke. Dr. Nadir's voice remained neutral. The audit records, what is verifiable. Her statement will be included with context. That terrified Celeste more than accusation. Context had always been something she controlled through tone. Now it belonged to minutes, logs, and adults with keyboards. Poppy began crying quietly. Adrian went red. Celeste looked at me then, and for the first time that day, she stopped performing sadness. Her eyes asked the question she would never say aloud. How much did you know? I did not answer with my face. That was a skill I had paid for in another life. The final count was not announced immediately. That was its own kind of punishment. Dr. Nadir and Ms. Varga invalidated the fraudulent and irregular ballots, then reviewed every remaining vote by student ID, preference mark, and box sequence. The legitimate count was closer than anyone expected. I had 223. Celeste had 219. The remaining candidates had 37. For votes. Not a landslide. Not a heroic triumph. For ordinary students somewhere in the year group had been enough to matter once the fake ones were removed. That detail made me emotional in a way I did not expect. In my first life, I believed Celeste stole a victory that must have been mine by a wide moral margin. The truth was smaller and stronger. Real democracy is often fragile enough to fit inside for careful choices. Principal Rowe read the corrected result in the conference room first. Celeste stared at the table. Poppy sobbed openly now. Adrian looked like he wanted to blame someone but had run out of safe targets. Mrs. Arden said, surely, given the distress and irregularity, the appropriate response is to rerun the election. Of course. When corruption fails, call a contamination and request a new field. Dr. Nadir said, a rerun is not automatically appropriate when the audit can identify and remove invalid votes with confidence, and when the irregularities benefited one candidate's total. Mrs. Arden's smile vanished. Principal Rowe looked at me. Liana, before certification, I want to ask whether you believe the corrected result should stand. The room turned. It was a trap, though not malicious. If I said yes too eagerly, I looked hungry. If I said rerun, I risked giving Celeste another battlefield. I took a breath. If the audit can verify the corrected count, it should stand. Not because I benefit, because valid votes should not be erased to protect invalid ones. Dr. Nadir nodded once. Sarah squeezed my knee under the table. The public correction happened at 3:40 in the auditorium, and it was nothing like the first announcement. No music. No campaign banners.
No cheating.
Just Year 11 called back from classes, confused and restless. Teachers lining the aisles with expressions designed to prevent whispering and therefore causing more of it. Celeste sat 3 rows ahead of me, no longer in the candidate section because there was no candidate section now. Poppy was absent. Adrian sat near the back, beside a deputy. Principal Rose stepped to the microphone with a printed statement. I almost pitied him. Almost. Students, he began. The election result announced earlier today was provisional pending routine verification. That verification has identified a number of invalid votes and process irregularities. Those votes have been removed from the count. The certified result is as follows. Liana Vale, 223. Celeste Arden, 219. Other candidates, 37. Therefore, the certified Year 11 class president is Liana Vale. There was no immediate applause. The room needed a second to understand that the story had reversed without asking permission. Then Sarah stood.
Not subtly.
She rose like a courtroom objection and clapped so hard it echoed. June from the back row joined. Mira joined. Then others. The applause grew unevenly, uncertainly, then with something like relief. I stood because Principal Rowe gestured for me to come forward. My legs felt unreliable. As I passed Celeste's row, she did not look at me.
Good.
I was not sure I could have survived her face right then without remembering the first hug. On stage, Principal Rowe handed me the provisional badge, then corrected himself. Certified badge, he said quietly. That tiny correction nearly made me cry. He offered me the microphone. I had not prepared a victory speech because in both lives I had not imagined victory arriving like an autopsy. I looked out at the students, embarrassed supporters, guilty bystanders, curious younger observers, teachers who had watched 2 results in one day and would probably attend a professional learning session about it later. Celeste's white ribbon was visible in the 3rd row. I thought about saying something sharp. I thought about saying leadership is not performance as if I had not already said it. Instead, I chose the only sentence that mattered. Thank you to everyone whose valid vote was counted, I said. A strange hush followed. Not just the people who voted for me. Everyone. The point of today is not that my name changed places with Celeste's. The point is that the count was checked, and checking protected your choices. My voice steadied. If I do this role properly, you should not have to trust me blindly. You should be able to see what I do, question it, and correct me if the numbers do not match the story. I paused because I saw Maya, a girl from the Disability Access Group, nod once. I will post open meeting notes next week. I will create a student issue tracker with follow-up dates. And I will ask that election processes be made clearer so no future candidate, winner or loser, has to rely on rumors to know whether the result was fair. That was enough. I stepped back before anger could sneak into the microphone. The applause this time was not loud in the flattering way. It was serious. I preferred it. The consequences came in layers, because schools rarely drop the whole truth at once. Poppy received a formal misconduct record, suspension from the events committee, and removal from office volunteer privileges. Adrian lost his tech helper certification, his debate vice captain role, and more painfully for him, the assumption that he was clever enough to be forgiven without paperwork. Celeste's case was more complicated because she had been careful not to touch every mechanism herself that had saved her in the first life. This time, her sentence about test votes, the messages recovered from Poppy's phone, and the campaign group chat were enough to show knowledge of improper assistance, even if she had not personally forged every ballot. She was disqualified from standing for elected office for the year, removed from the leadership fast-track program pending review, and required to attend an integrity panel. Her parents appealed, obviously. They called the process harsh, politically motivated, emotionally damaging, and disproportionate to student enthusiasm. Dr. Nadir's report was colder than all of them. The irregularities were not spontaneous enthusiasm, it said. They were coordinated efforts to alter a leadership selection process. Coordinated efforts.
Aita.
Selection process. Adults love bloodless phrases, but sometimes bloodless phrases are sharp enough to cut through expensive outrage. Celeste did not apologize.
Not then.
Not properly. She approached me 2 weeks later outside the council room, where I was pinning up the first open meeting notes as promised. The notes were boring and beautiful. Tutoring support proposal assigned to Ms. Grant. Lunch space survey due Friday. Exam stress forum scheduled. Uniform affordability issue referred to Finance Committee. Actual leadership looks terrible on posters, but excellent on spreadsheets. Celeste stopped beside me, her hair unpinned, no ribbon, eyes shadowed in a way that almost made her look like a normal tired girl instead of a fallen campaign monument. "You must feel very noble," she said. I kept pinning. "Mostly busy." "You let me stand up there." "Yes." "You let everyone clap." "Yes." "You hugged me." My hand paused on the notice board. That part had clearly bothered her most. Not the audit, not the invalid ballots, not the loss of office. The hug. The moment she thought she had turned me into evidence of her grace, only to realize I had turned it into evidence of mine. I looked at her. "You wanted a picture of me being bitter." I declined. Her jaw tightened. "You're colder than people think." "No," I said. "I'm just not willing to bleed in public for your campaign anymore." She looked away first. For 1 second, the mask slipped enough that I saw the fear beneath it. Not fear of punishment, but fear of irrelevance. Celeste did not know who she was without a room arranging itself around her. That was sad. It was also not my emergency. "You won by 4 votes, she said, voice low. "Don't act like the school chose you by destiny." I smiled then, not because it was kind, but because it was true.
Exactly.
For valid votes mattered. That's why stealing 28 was not a personality flaw. It was an attack on everyone. She had no answer for that, so she left. Being class president was less glamorous than losing had made it look. That was the funniest and most useful discovery. There were no constant cheers, no halo, no magical respect. There were complaints about broken microwaves, demands for better formal themes, anonymous issue forms containing both serious well-being concerns and one request for less depressing soup. There were council minutes no one read until something affected them personally. There were teachers who praised transparency while asking me not to publish details too quickly. There were students who voted for Celeste and now watched me for signs I would punish them with neglect. I did not. That was the point. Real leadership cannot only serve the people who clapped at the second announcement. I created the issue tracker. I posted meeting notes. I asked the scholarship students what support they needed after donor events and discovered most wanted transport vouchers, food, and the option not to be photographed during exam week. I met with the disability access group and learned the accessible ramp near the library became slippery every time it rained, which the school had called a maintenance issue for 2 years because nobody had attached enough student names to the complaint. We attached names. We got it fixed. No one made a banner. Good. Banners are often where work goes to become decoration. Sarah adjusted to my presidency with the elegance of a best friend who believed victory required snacks. She attended every open meeting for the first month and sat in the corner eating crackers, glaring at anyone who used the word tone too aggressively. "Do you realize," she said one afternoon while I sorted survey responses, "that your entire revenge was basically letting bureaucracy commit homicide?" No one died. Celeste's leadership career briefly flatlined. That's not homicide. Attempted paperwork manslaughter. I laughed so hard I dropped 3 forms. That mattered too. In the first life, the stolen election had made me suspicious of every room, every apology, every smiling winner. In this life, I still became cautious, but not joyless. That was a victory I had not planned. Rebirth had not made me pure or endlessly patient. It made me strategic. But strategy without laughter becomes another cage, and I had enough cages with school crests on them. Sometimes after meetings, Sarah and I sat on the chapel steps, eating vending machine chocolate and watching Celeste cross the courtyard with fewer followers than before. Some girls had abandoned her because scandal is contagious. Some stayed because proximity to beauty and money has gravity. Celeste learned to move through the school without waving at everyone. I learned not to watch her too long. The Integrity Panel released its final summary near the end of term. It did not name every detail publicly, but candidates were required to attend a new election ethics workshop before future nominations, and all voting procedures were changed. No student handling of absentee ballots, no campaign team near ballot boxes, digital test codes disabled before voting, ballot ID reconciliation before any announcement, and automatic external review for leadership-linked elections. Principal Rowe hated how long the new rules were. Ms. Varga looked 20 years younger when they passed. Dr. Nadir sent me a formal note thanking me for early reporting and measured conduct. Measured conduct. That phrase would have enraged the first life version of me, who had been punished for unmeasured pain. This time, I understood measurement had protected me because I submitted the warning before the wound. Still, I did not romanticize it. Children should not have to become election monitors to survive school ambition. Girls should not need timestamps to be believed when they say something is wrong. Calm should be a choice, not a performance demanded as the entry fee for credibility. I wrote that in my private journal, then turned the thought into a proposal for anonymous campaign process reporting. Ms. Varga approved it. "You're making us work harder," she said. "I know." "Good," she replied. The final confrontation happened at the winter leadership dinner, because Westbridge could not resist putting all its ambition under chandeliers and calling it community. The dinner gathered council members, parents, donors, and selected students in the old hall, where portraits of former principals watched us eat overcooked chicken with moral superiority. I attended as class president. Celeste attended because her parents still sat on 2 committees and, apparently shame, did not cancel catering. She wore navy instead of white.
Not even.
During dessert, Mrs. Arden approached me with the kind of smile adults use when they have decided a child has inconvenienced them but must be handled gracefully. "Liana," she said, "you've done impressive work with the issue tracker. Celeste always said you were very organized." It was a sentence designed to steal even my confidence retroactively, making it something Celeste had noticed, perhaps encouraged. I smiled with all my teeth. "Thank you." The tracker was part of my original campaign platform. Her eyes cooled. "Of course. I only mean these situations can teach everyone." Celeste has suffered a great deal. Across the room, Celeste had gone still, listening. In my first life, I might have apologized for her suffering because girls are trained to put cushions under people who fall off the pedestals they climbed by stepping on us. This time, I set down my fork. I'm sure she has. So did the students whose votes were altered. Mrs. Arden's smile vanished for half a second. That is a very severe way to describe a school election. It is a very accurate way. Principal Rowe, blessedly or strategically, appeared beside us before she could continue. "Liana, Dr. Nadir, would like a word about the student transparency model." I turned away, not rescued exactly, but redirected toward work that mattered. Celeste caught me near the coat room later. For once, she was alone. No mother, no Poppy, no Adrian, no orbit of girls carrying her atmosphere. "I didn't tell my mother to say that," she said. I believed her, which was inconvenient. "Okay. I did know about Adrian testing votes," she added. The admission was quiet, almost swallowed by the music from the hall. Not all of it, but enough. I looked at her. There was no audience. That made the truth less useful to her, which made it feel more real. "Why are you telling me?" She leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "Because everyone keeps saying I made one mistake." It wasn't one. It was a lot of little moments where I didn't stop things because I wanted the result. That was the closest she had come to an apology. I waited. She forced herself to continue. "I'm sorry for letting them change votes. I'm sorry for hugging you like I was being gracious when I thought I'd beaten you." The hug again. The real wound beneath the strategy. I folded my arms, not to reject her, but to hold myself steady. "Thank you for saying it." She looked at me quickly, maybe hoping for more. Forgiveness, absolution, a promise I would tell people she had grown. I gave her none of that. "What happens now?" she asked. You decide whether you're sorry because you got caught or because you understand what you stole. She laughed once without humor. You sound like Ms. Varga. Good. For a second, something almost like the girl she could have been appeared in her face. Then the hall doors opened, voices spilled out, and she straightened. The mask returned, but thinner, not gone.
Thinner was enough for now.
By the end of the year, the election became a case study in the civics curriculum, anonymized so badly everyone knew exactly who it described. A school leadership election produced a provisional result later changed by audit. The worksheet began, as if we had all not lived through the auditorium whiplash. Students had to answer questions about validity, transparency, stakeholder trust, and whether reruns are always fair. I watched a year 10 argue passionately that invalid votes should be removed rather than valid votes erased, and something in me healed a little. Not because the school had become perfect. It had not. But because the story had moved from gossip to lesson, from scandal to structure. Celeste eventually re-entered leadership through a supervised service role with no election attached. She organized winter coat donations with ruthless efficiency and no speeches. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was strategy. The difference mattered less because the coats were delivered. Poppy transferred to another school at the end of term. Adrian became dramatically interested in sports where no tablets were involved. Sarah and I survived council, exams, and the soup complaint crisis, which I still consider my hardest leadership test. On the last day before summer break, I stood alone in the auditorium after everyone else had left. The stage curtains were open. Dust floated in the afternoon light. The microphone stood at center stage, silent now, the same microphone that had announced Celeste first and me second, provisional and certified, lie and correction in one day. I walked up the steps and stood where Principal Rowe had handed me the badge. In my first life, this room had taught me that public loss can become permanent if the first story is clean enough. In this life, the room taught me something better. A first count is not destiny. Applause is not certification. A hug is not grace if it is staged over theft. And leadership that cannot survive an audit was never leadership at all. I touched the badge on my blazer. It was smaller than the weight I had given it across 2 lives. Just metal and enamel. The real presidency was in spreadsheets, minutes, repaired ramps, transport vouchers, boring meetings, check numbers, and the 4 valid votes that had waited beneath 28 false ones to be counted properly. So yes, I let Celeste win class president. I let her campaign too close to the ballot line, let Poppy carry her clipboard into the wrong hallway, let Adrian play with test logins, let the first announcement crown her, let the auditorium clap, let her hug me, and let her whisper that the count was clear. I let her believe my calm was defeat because I had learned what rage costs when institutions prefer tidy winners to angry truth. But I had already sent the email. I had already named the pattern. I had already placed the facts where they could not be accused of jealousy after the result. Celeste never knew the vote count was being audited twice. She never knew the first victory was only provisional, the second count had sharper teeth, and the external review would follow every duplicate ID, forged envelope, test code, hallway camera, and careless sentence back to the people who thought popularity could blur math. In my first life, I tried to fight the result after the room had finished clapping. In this one, I let the room clap first. Then I watched the numbers stand up, clear their throats, and take the presidency back.